Nitrogen. Nitrogen is a primary component of proteins. Every single protein is a chain of amino acids, and an amino acid is a molecule that contains an amine group, hence the name amino acid. They all are unique because they have an amine group. And what defines an amine group? Nitrogen. So you need nitrogen in every single link in the chain of every protein in every cell. And that's a lot of nitrogen. And nitrogen is necessary for energy transport. It's necessary to make chlorophyll. Nitrogen is a workhorse type of essential macronutrient element. And that's why we have to spend so much time worrying about it and making sure it's there. In addition, nitrogen is very chemically reactive, many different forms that it exists in. It can leach easily down into the groundwater. It can turn into forms that will volatilize and leave the soil as gas. It can be used by other organisms, the bacteria and fungi and other soil organisms or weeds. Nitrogen can just disappear on you. And it just doesn't disappear. It's going somewhere, but you can lose what you think you had. So sources of nitrogen, certainly organic matter in the soil as it decomposes is a slow release form of nitrogen. So if you're an organic grower, you might add organic matter to continually provide a decomposition source to provide more nitrogen and other nutrients as well. Legumes, you can plant legumes among your crops or as a cover crop. Things like beans and peas and clover and vetch all have special bacteria called nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And those nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the roots of legumes help fix more nitrogen. Now, the bacteria don't do much work if you already have lots of nitrogen in the soil, but when you're growing grapes, you keep a modest level of nitrogen, so legumes do help. If I was growing legumes between lettuce or spinach or something, it wouldn't do me much good because I've already got so much nitrogen in the soil, the legumes are going to basically just grow and be happy with the existing nitrogen. The bacteria are only going to make more nitrogen, fix more nitrogen from the atmosphere and put it into the soil if there's a lower level of nitrogen already in the soil. Irrigation water. Now that's not a good thing. That's not what you want to do, but lots of wells are contaminated with some nitrate and you need to monitor your well. You need to measure it and it goes into the calculation for how much nitrogen you're using. And it's a big mistake not to do that. Because if your plant needs 20 pounds of nitrogen based on your best calculations, and you end up realizing that you're adding another 6 pounds through your irrigation water, you over-fertilized. And you didn't realize it. Even though it's only a small amount, it can really sway the total. You have to take into account irrigation water. And obviously the fertilizers are the main source we think of when we think of how do you get nitrogen to your crop. Nitrate and ammonium are the two primary forms of inorganic nitrogen that plants can take up. They mostly take up nitrate, but they can take up ammonium too. It depends on the plant. Some plants are better at taking ammonium than others. But ammonium needs to be incorporated into some organic compounds in the roots to be properly absorbed. I'm not going to worry about the chemistry there, but nitrate is readily available to the plants. It's easier for the plants to take up. And once nitrate is taken up, it's reduced to ammonia. And once it's reduced to ammonia, then it's in a form that the plant can manipulate to make it into whatever it needs. And it's that ease of making ammonia that's a problem. Ammonia is not ammonium. Ammonia is the same stuff we use to clean our floors. And in low concentrations, it's a fertilizer. In higher concentrations, it's a floor cleaner. It's even a refrigerant. But ammonia easily turns into a gas. So as bacteria and fungi are reducing nitrate in the soil, that's what I was talking about, losing some to the atmosphere. They change, they have a chemical reaction on that wonderful nitrate that your crop needs. It turns to ammonia, and boom, it volatilizes before your plant ever gets it. Especially on nice warm days after a fertilizer application. Uptake of nitrogen, grapevines absorb most, if not all, nitrogen as nitrate and transport it in that form to the leaves where it is converted for use. Nitrates are soluble and move into the root zone by mass flow, so it just moves with the water. And excess water may leach nitrogen out of the root zone, so you don't want to put too much irrigation water in, because any water that you put on that pushes water below the root zone of the plants is pushing the nutrients with it that easily move. And which nutrients move the easiest? Nitrate is one of them. Nitrate moves down through the soil because nitrate is negatively charged and soil is also negatively charged. So nitrate doesn't stick to the soil very well because they both are negative. So the nitrate just moves with the water and can move down through and past the roots. And once it's past the roots, it's lost. And eventually that will work its way down into the groundwater, causing some of the problems that we have today. Deficiency symptoms of nitrogen. Of all the major nutrients, nitrogen is the most likely to be deficient. And you can get dramatic reduction in yields. You can have stunted plants, yellowing, less vigorous plants, all kinds of different symptoms. If they're under stress, the petioles of grapes tend to turn reddish color. That is one of the stress responses that grapes have. Not all plants do this. That is unique to some plants that have the reddening response to stress. But yeah, the petioles of some grape varieties, most grape varieties that I'm aware of, they can turn red when they are stressed for nitrogen. What if I have too much? An excess of nitrogen, the foliage becomes an unusually dark green, too dark. You get reduced fruit set, not good. Lower fruit quality with thin skin and other problems, potentially disease is going to get in because of those thin skins. You get bunch rots, molds and other things that can come in, or even the stem necrosis. The rachis can start to die, and that is not a good thing. In the winter, the plants or the vines don't harden off well, and so they're now more susceptible to frost damage, and they're going to have a problem in the winter. If you get a frost, they're more likely to suffer or die because you had excess nitrogen the season before. Determining the need for nitrogen, well, certainly you want to look at visual symptoms. You want to walk your vineyards. You want to look at your vines and make a visual assessment. You're going to look at pruning weight. So every year you should know exactly how many pounds of pruning material you take out per acre for every one of your blocks. And keeping track of that helps you monitor the actual weight of material, and that is nitrogen leaving the field. And there's a calculation you can use that can help estimate, depending on what time of year you're doing your pruning and other factors, you can calculate how much nitrogen you actually took out as pruning. Petiole sampling. So during the growing season, when you have active growing vines, you can take off a leaf, look at the petiole, take a sample of the tissue there, and a lab can give you an idea of the actual nutrient levels in the leaves itself. You can also look at a soil sample as well. What is in my soil? And that's not listed here. I definitely would list that here. I'm sure that's part of their routine. They just didn't add that to this particular list. And the variety of the rootstock is also important. How much vigor is in that rootstock is part of the equation. The rootstock is going to influence how much nitrogen you're going to need to grow the crop. The more vigorous the rootstock, the more nitrogen it's going to take to support that vigorous growth. The less vigorous, the less nitrogen you're going to need. So when do you apply nitrogen? It's definitely needed in early spring for that rapid growth. That's when you're growing leaves and shoots. And that's when you need nitrogen. That's when you need most of it. It's that burst of growth in the spring. After crop set, nitrogen supply should only be enough to provide for adequate shoot growth and healthy leaf surface. So once you've got your fruit set, you don't want excess nitrogen there because you don't want excess shoot growth. You want just enough left over after your spring application that, you know, by the time it gets to the fruit set, that you've used up much of that nitrogen and you have a residual of nitrogen that's enough to get it through the remainder. You can apply during post-harvest, just after bud break, or both. So that's another time where you might choose to apply a little bit of extra nitrogen. But these are periods of active root growth. So you need a little bit of a kick of extra nitrogen potentially there. And it's up to the vineyard manager. How do you want to manage those applications? But definitely the spring is the biggie, and you definitely don't want too much after fruit set. Cover crops, we talked about legumes here. In the bottom picture, you can see the nodules that contain the nitrogen fixing bacteria of legumes that will add nitrogen by taking the nitrogen gas, N2 gas, out of the air. Our atmosphere that we breathe is about 78% nitrogen gas, and we can't use it, plants can't use it. The only thing that can use it is nitrogen fixing bacteria. And the only other way to fix nitrogen into soluble forms is either lightning or through chemical processes like major chemical companies that manufacture conventional fertilizers. They use energy primarily from the fuel industry. The excess heat energy is used to fix nitrogen and make fertilizers. But in nature, it's lightning, which you can't rely on lightning to fertilize your plants. That's not enough, especially in this area, and legumes. And also the decomposition of other crops. So if I'm growing cover crops that aren't legumes and I disc it back in as they decompose, they're adding nitrogen that way through decomposition. So it doesn't have to be a leguminous cover crop. The next one on the list is phosphorus. And few vineyards in California have phosphorus deficiencies, but in certain situations like hillside cuts, where you have kind of an unusual soil profile on a terraced hillside, or when you've done land leveling and you've totally rearranged the vineyard's topography, you might end up with some soils and portions of the root zone that are phosphorus or phosphate deficient. And so you need to know that, and you need to deal with it. In some other areas where you might have especially low or shallow soils that are just on the edge of being too shallow for vineyards, you also might have some problems. The role of phosphorus, you need it for making DNA and RNA. You need it for making energy transfer. There's a molecule of energy called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, meaning every ATP molecule that is the backbone of energy in plants and animal cells, every single ATP has 3 phosphorus atoms, 3 phosphate groups, plus other important factors. For optimal growth, you need between 0.3 and 0.5% of the plant dry matter is phosphorus. And if you get too high, around 1%, it can be toxic to certain species. So you don't want to overdo it. But again, that's also not usually a problem. I don't hear too much complaining about managing phosphorus in vineyards. It seems to be something that's readily easy in our region. If you do have deficiencies, the symptoms can be rather subtle, but leaf expansion might not be complete, surface area of the leaves, so you got these smaller, less expanded leaves. These shoots might not grow to full length. And other subtle symptoms, something that I have noticed, tomatoes can start having a little bit of purpling, and I've heard from other people that grapes are the same thing, that purpling that you get from stress can also occur with phosphorus deficiency, but it's pretty rare in this area. Potassium, very, very important in vineyards. You need lots of potassium. It's never incorporated into a structural component of plants. It always stays as K+ ions, and it's utilized as a salt balance. It activates enzymes. It works for osmotic control, the movement of water, many, many things, but it's potassium staying in the cells to control salt balance. The same thing, we need a lot of potassium. What happens if you're exercising too much and you get dehydrated? Athletes especially know this. What do you want to do? Eat a banana? That's one of the things that they say. Why do you eat a banana? Bananas are high in potassium. So you start getting cramps. That's a sign that your muscle cells are getting low in potassium. You got to replenish that. And Gatorade, yeah, it also has high potassium, but for all the sugar you're getting, it's probably not the best source of potassium. It's more of a marketing gimmick than a reality. Most potassium comes directly from the minerals in the soil, as it's a slow release and it's gradually solubilized. So it's in the rocks, in the soil naturally, but it's highly mobile. It moves through the plant because it's never incorporated into a structural component of the plants. It's always in a liquid soluble ionic form. It can be moved around the plant, all you need. So even though potassium is readily available in soils, and generally there's adequate amounts in soils for plant growth, there's not adequate amounts in vineyards for optimal plant growth. There's a difference between a plant being happy to complete its life cycle and one that is as productive as you can get it. And to make a potassium available for optimal growth, we need to add some as a grower. Potassium is used, as I mentioned, osmotic potential for moving water around and other plant-water relations. Stomatal movement, that's also related to water movement. Cell extension, that's actually related to hormones and enzymes that are responsible for cell growth. You need it for effective photosynthesis. You need it for enzymes to work properly. Everything needs proper salt balance in the cytoplasm or the cell doesn't function effectively. Now, osmosis is the net movement of water across a semi or partially permeable membrane from a region of high solute potential or high solute concentration to an area of low solute potential or low solute concentration. Excuse me, I said that wrong. Take two is the net movement of water across a semi-permeable membrane from a region of high solute potential, which means low solute concentration, to an area of low solute potential, otherwise known as high solute concentration. or solvent potential. I'm tired. I've been sick. Give me a break. Anyway, the solvent potential, a high solvent potential, means that there's a low amount of solutes. A low solute or solvent potential means that there's already a high amount of solutes. So this is saying it in an opposite way of the way I normally present it in my plant science class. So sometimes I get this backwards because I don't normally read it this way, but it's good to see things from another perspective. I look at it from the amount of solutes. Water moves from low solutes to high solutes, which means low solutes, high solvent potential, meaning there's still lots of room left to dissolve more stuff, to low solute potential, where there's very little room to dissolve more stuff because it's already filled with solutes. All right? Water moves towards the dissolved salts. Water moves towards the salts across a semi-permeable membrane. What is that? The semi-permeable membrane is the cell's plasma membrane, the cell membrane. So water can move through the cell membrane from one cell to another, and it goes from where the salts are low to where the salts are high. That is osmosis. And there's no energy input without energy. And so water just moves. So what can a plant do to move water? Well, if you want your stomata to open, for example, you can move potassium into the guard cells. When you move potassium into the guard cells, what happens? Water, by osmosis, is going to follow the potassium. Make those guard cells plump and turgid and open up the stomata. You want to close the stomata? Pump potassium out. Now you've got low potassium in the guard cells, higher potassium outside the guard cells, so the water follows the higher salts. It follows the salt out. And so the stomata close. All right? So that is potassium and how it works with osmotic potential. Now, there are special ion channels that potassium can be moved through. This is how the guard cells are pumping these potassium into and out of the cells. I'm not going to get into the details there, but plants do have the ability to manipulate the direction or the flow of certain salts to cause water to move along with it, to manipulate osmosis. So here's the stomata. Here's an electron micrograph of the underside of a leaf, and you can see a stomata open. Here's one guard cell and another guard cell. It's not clear because of the coating of the epidermis and cuticle. You can't see the individual cells, but these are two guard cells, and they appear plump and have plenty of water because the guard cell is open. The stomata, the pore between the guard cells, is open. And a singular, I should have called it a stoma. It is a singular stomata. One is a stoma. And it's open, meaning that the guard cells must have plenty of water in them, meaning the plant must have moved potassium into the guard cells to move the water in. It needs to close the guard cells, pump potassium out, the water will follow by osmosis. As long as the guard cell is open, photosynthesis can occur because carbon dioxide can move into the stomata, into the leaf, so there's plenty of carbon dioxide as the raw material for photosynthesis, and the excess oxygen can move out. So here is an illustration of that. You move potassium out, the water follows the stomata close. You move potassium in, the water follows by osmosis, makes the stomata turgid, and it opens it up. So plants can manipulate what they need. If they have the stomata open, not only is gas exchanging, but you're losing water. And so that's one of the reasons why a plant might want to close its stomata. If it's too hot or windy or too dry, and there's not enough water in the root zone, the plant might go, wait a minute, water stress, close the stomata. We'll take a hit with the photosynthesis. It's okay. We don't need all of the photosynthesis right now. It's more important to hold on to the water. Close the stomata. When conditions are cooler or we get more water, whatever, when there is more appropriate conditions, we'll open the stomata back up. Not going to go into the detail of the cell expansion and tropisms, but plants move in response to light, and tendrils of vines, the little highly specialized leaves that wrap around other stems and wires and other things, those tendrils are thigmotropic. So in terms of tropisms, the ability of plants to move either in response to light or in response to touch with a tendril, you need plenty of potassium for these tropisms to effectively work. Here's a photograph of deficiency. You can see a chlorotic pattern, but it's not the same. It's not as generalized as the chlorotic pattern you would get with low nitrogen. Advanced deficiency, you can see that the yellow parts are starting to die. You're getting necrosis, especially around the edges. So this is a fairly severe deficiency for this particular vine. Calcium. How many do I have left here? Quite a bit, so I'm going to take another break.